All right, everybody, I am finally back with my Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny full spoiler review. So I'm going to run through the movie, and I'm going to talk about what I really liked, what I didn't like, and we're going to talk about a lot of spoilers in the film. I've seen the movie 3 times now, and with every viewing, the film actually gets better and better. So if you haven't seen the movie, don't listen to the haters. I tell people, go and watch the movie yourself and find out if you like it or not. I've seen people be on both sides of the coin of this issue. Well, with this film. And I will tell you, I have everybody who surrounds me, my friends, my family, everybody who's seen it has liked it. I have yet to know one of my friends or one of my family members who didn't like it. And so most of the audience likes it as well. And so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It is not woke like everybody claims it is. I was very nervous going into the film because I was convinced that Disney was going to ruin Indiana Jones the way they did with Luke Skywalker and the way they have with Thor. Disney has a problem with male authority figures. And so I figured they were going to drag Indiana Jones down. And the good news is they didn't. This is still very much an Indiana Jones movie with Harrison Ford at the helm. The movie opens up in 1944, and the whole opening sequence is about 15 to 20 minutes. Takes place with Indy being dragged into a building with a bunch of Nazis. He's kind of covered. His face is covered like he was at the beginning. He had a bag over his head and he was drug out of a vehicle, just like not out of the back of a vehicle, the trunk. But it was kind of like the same opening of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where he's being dragged into a building with a bunch of Nazis. And they take his hat off, or the hood off, and it's Indiana Jones, de-aged. Now, the de-aging process they used at the beginning of the film is not perfect, but it's pretty close. On repeated viewings, it gets easier to watch now that you get past what they did, and you can actually go in and enjoy it just as an Indiana Jones adventure. The one thing that's kind of off is the fact that his voice is older with a younger face, which is kind of weird. But you find out that he is there to retrieve an object, a knife. And this knife has historical and religious implications. The Nazis are also looking for the same thing, and they have it in their possession. And we are introduced to Dr. Voller, who is a German scientist. He wants this device as well. He examines it and notices something is weird. They are loaded onto a train, and in the meantime, they are going to be hanging Indiana Jones up to hang him inside this building. But a bomb comes in, blows up all the Germans. Indiana Jones survives. And that was kind of an interesting scene because he was the only one that didn't get killed by the bomb. He gets knocked back because he was up so high. The blast moved him, but he didn't have any effects of the bomb going off at all, which is a little outlandish, but he survives. And he ends up on a pretty cool chase to reach this train where they took this item. In the meantime, his friend, Basil, I'm forgetting his last name here. I don't want to get anything wrong in this. So it is Basil Shaw. In the film, he's known as Baz, played by Toby Jones. He gets caught trying to, find out where Indy is. He gets caught by the German army, and he is thrown on the train. Now, Indy doesn't even know he's been captured, but Indy makes a beeline for the train. There's a pretty cool chase scene, heavily CGI, though. CGI was used too much in this film. He gets to the train, and the Indiana Jones music plays as he's running towards the top, and he takes out some German soldiers, actually gets one of their suits, and then is able to make it through the train and goes to find this same knife and finds out that it was a fake. But he notices in that same car that everything else that the Germans have, and Hitler was big on, now this was beyond Hitler, this was after he had lost, but they were still collecting artifacts from all over the world. They were hoarding these things, and Indiana Jones felt like it was his job to save that car, to save those artifacts. Well, he ends up finding out that his friend Baz is on the train too, is able to let him out, and this is when you find out that Voller was actually interested in something else that was on that train, which catches the eye and the ear of Shaw, of Baz. And it's something called the if I can even say it right, Antikythera. Antikythera. And the Antikythera is a device from the time of Archimedes in 200 BC that could supposedly detect fissures in time. It had 3 dials on it, and when they were lined up, they could predict fissures in time. So Baz wants to get his hands on this. So they have a part of it. There are 3 parts. They get one part of it. Indiana Jones and him grab that one part, actually from Voller. Indiana Jones punches him in the face and is able to get the Antikythera, and they head up to the top of the train to get out. And when they are up there, they are attacked by the German soldier, the captain of the German soldier. And during that, Indiana Jones and him have a fight. We get to see Indiana Jones use his whip in the scene, which was pretty cool because you don't see it coming, and you hear the crack of the whip, and it pulls the gun away from the German soldier. He asks Baz to pick it up and shoot the soldier, and Baz actually ends up shooting Indiana Jones. It looks like in the hand. You don't see where it goes, and there's no Indiana Jones doesn't get hurt from the bullet. And that's when Baz takes his hand and he lines it up just right and shoots the soldier, and Indy kicks him off the train. That's when we have Dr. Voller show up, and Indiana Jones is caught there. Voller has them at gunpoint and wants the Antikythera. Indiana Jones throws it to him, and at that point Baz tells him to duck because there's one of those bells that goes over the train that's about to come and hit them. And just as they turn around, Voller gets smacked by that and gets knocked off the train and should be dead. But he shows up later, and nobody knows how he survives that hit. Anybody getting hit the way he did would be dead instantly. And so that's kind of one of those other weird intricacies of the film. And that's when the train gets blown up by a bomb. Indy and him end up in the water, and they have the Antikythera with them, and they take off. So that's the whole opening sequence. It's pretty cool, heavily CGI. And then we move into Indiana Jones in his apartment as an old man. Now, a lot of people said he was a grumpy old drunk in this film. He's not. He was not a grumpy old drunk. And this scene I'm going to talk about proves this. But what's interesting is the camera goes into his apartment. You find out that he actually slept in a recliner in the living room. And one of his neighbors, one of his students, actually starts playing some loud music, and it jars Indiana Jones awake at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, what's interesting is if you pay attention when they first go into his apartment, the camera pans in, and you actually see a memorial for his son, Mutt. And if you're not looking and you don't see it, I noticed this on the third viewing, but I didn't see it on the first 2. The camera goes past it, and that's what that is. You can see the flag folded, Mutt's picture, and it then shows Indiana Jones shirtless, sitting in the chair. He gets up to go, he grabs a bat and goes over to the neighbors, and you think this is where he's going to go, get off my lawn, grumpy old man. But he doesn't. He actually taps on the door and actually pretty much nicely asks them to turn it down, that, it's first thing in the morning. He's forceful with it, but he's not angry or grumpy about it. And that's when he said, you got to turn, his student said, you got to turn on the TV. It's Moon Day in the 60s. So this was when the astronauts landed on the moon, and there's going to be a parade later that day. Then it goes to Indiana Jones at his school. He's lecturing about Archimedes, and he's talking about the cool things that Archimedes had created, and he's asking his students if they'd read any of the materials that are going to be coming up on the test, and they haven't. He starts asking them questions. He said he's going to have to spoon feed it to them. So we can see Indiana Jones as a professor again. We get this in almost every of the films. We get a little bit of him in the classroom, and it's no different here. Nobody can answer the questions he's asking except somebody up in the corner, which ends up being his goddaughter, which he doesn't know in this scene, and she starts answering the questions. He then goes into the college, and you find out that he's retiring. Now, this isn't his last day at the college, but he is retiring, and they kind of throw him a party. He's given a clock. He kind of looks at it weird, goes outside, walks to go to a bar, and hands the clock off to somebody else. At the bar, that girl who was in his class shows up, and she says, "You really don't know who I am, do you?" And it was then when Indiana Jones said, "Whatever it was, I'm sorry." He apologized for it, which I thought was kind of funny. It was a total Indiana Jones type line. And she goes, "No, it's me, Wombat." And we don't know at this stage who Wombat actually is, but it ends up being his goddaughter. It was Baz's daughter. And you find out at towards this part of the film that Baz had been, since they had grabbed the Antikythera, he had been looking for the other two parts his entire life and had some journals, and you found out it kind of drove him mad. And the last thing that happened was Baz gave the Antikythera to Indiana Jones and told him to destroy it, so it could basically save the rest of his time with his daughter and his mind. And it jumps forward, and she's looking for it, and she basically bullcraps Indiana Jones. He catches on. They go back to the school, and because that's where he's kind of storing it, and she did this whole thing of, I think it's still under the water, even though she knew that Indiana Jones had it, and he calls her out on it. He calls her out on her lies, figures out what she's doing, and he wants to know why she needs this, because it's at that point where some Germans show up looking for that same thing. Now, the people that show up aren't Germans, actually. I take that back. One of them is a CIA agent, and then two of them are hired, basically, not hitmen, but not even bodyguards, just kind of muscle for Dr. Voller. You find out that Dr. Voller has been working with the U.S. government and helped get people on the moon. And later that day, he's supposed to meet with the president to get an award. He's staying in a hotel there in the city where Indiana Jones is. And they get chased by the CIA agent and these two muscle men. And Shaw runs off with the device, and Indiana Jones is able to get out of the building. But he notices that these muscle men had killed a couple of people at the college. They're not allowed to have any type of no witnesses, basically. The CIA agent is not happy with the kills, but allows the men to do it. And Indiana Jones goes to check them, and that's when he calls the police, and that's when he is taken by the CIA agent as well as these hired muscle. And he ends up getting put into a truck, and this is where we have this chase scene right there in the city with him on a horse trying to get away from these Russians, the Russians and the CIA. And he does get away, and later on you find out on the news that he is being basically, they're looking for him for murder at the college. He's being framed for it. Well, it's at this stage that Voller finds out that Indiana Jones is there, and he wants to get Indiana Jones. And there's a point where Indiana Jones is watching the TV and seeing what's going on, and some guy's like, "Hey, you look like the guy they're looking for," and he's like, "It is him." And then that's when somebody comes in and punches that guy before he can alert anybody that is Indiana Jones. And you find out it's Sala. Sala is there. He works in the city as a taxi driver, and he takes Indiana Jones back to his apartment. And you find out that Indiana Jones had actually saved him and his family from the Middle East and brought them to the U.S. And that's where he's been living for many, many years. That's when Sala did some research and tells Indiana Jones that his goddaughter is not who she claimed to be, and that she sells basically antiquities for money, and that in Morocco, she was scheduled to marry a mobster there in the city, but the mobster's family owes this hotel a lot of money, and so she gets and sells these antiquities. So she was never there to get it to complete her father's work. She was there to sell it. Indiana Jones trails her there. There's a scene where Indiana Jones is getting to the airport to go to where she's going to be selling these items. And that's when Sala has a quick but heartfelt discussion with him that he misses all the adventures that they would have together, and he wants to go with Indiana Jones on one more adventure. And Indiana Jones is like, "You can't go with me. I have to take care of this. This isn't one of those types of adventures." And that's when Sala tells him, "Give him hell, Indiana Jones." And that's when Jones is almost hit by a taxi, and he goes into the airport. Now, I had one of my viewers say that is one of the dumbest lines in the movie, because why would he call out his name? He wasn't known as Indiana Jones, and that's what people forget. He was known as Dr. Henry Jones Jr., not as Indiana Jones. So they're not going to pick up on the fact that that's him. It's not like today where, everyone knows who everybody is at the airport. It was way different back in the 60s. And so Indiana Jones gets to Morocco, and this is where he finds his goddaughter selling the device. There's a bunch of mobsters there, bidding on it. The Nazis show up as well, and that's when Indiana Jones calls out that he's a Nazi, and he's like, I'm not a Nazi, I'm Dr. Schmidt. That's who he's going by here in the U.S. is Dr. Schmidt. And Indiana Jones, kind of calls him out for being a Nazi and says, last time I saw you, you were looking for the same device. And Voller ends up getting the device, and there's a chase scene at this point in these little cars there in Morocco. And it's a pretty cool chase scene. And we get to see Indiana Jones be Indiana Jones through this. It's pretty cool. He takes charge. Now, during this scene, Shaw does try to take over his goddaughter, Wombat. She does try to take over, but Indiana Jones isn't having it. And he had to save her several times during this sequence, even though she was trying to go off on her own. Well, her ex also shows up, and there's the chase involves not just them with the Germans, but also with her ex, who are bad people. And it's a pretty cool chase through the city. Well, in the end, Voller gets away with his half of the Antikythera, and Indiana Jones they need to go and find the other parts before the Germans do, so that they can't, wreak havoc in the world. This is when Indiana Jones has a discussion with his goddaughter and says, I know somebody who can basically help us get to the second part. She remembers the journals that her father had, and it's all in her head. She has a photographic memory, and she memorized some of these journals and tells Indiana Jones, I know where it is, and it's going to require them to go under the water. He says he knows a guy who can help them out, and this is where Antonio Banderas comes in. He is a deep-sea diver who has helped Indiana Jones in the past. They go and find the second part, supposedly what they believe is the second part. They bring it up, and that's when Voller shows up. Voller is always one step behind them, and he's there and ends up killing Indiana Jones's friend Antonio Banderas. Now, before they get there and do this dive, there's an important scene the night before with Indiana Jones and his goddaughter. And this is where we find out what happened to Mutt. Now, a lot of people think that they went through this too quickly and it was kind of thrown in there, but I disagree. I love this scene a lot because Harrison Ford really sold it. You could tell that he put his heart and soul into this performance, and you believed everything he was saying. And his goddaughter asked him, if you could go back in time, what would you do? And he said, I would stop my son from enlisting. And she says, how would you do that? And he said, I would tell him that he dies and that his mother is heartbroken over it and that his father had no way to ever console her, and it ended up being the end of their marriage. And it was such a heartfelt performance. You felt it. That mixed with the music from John Williams, it was just a very emotional scene. It was well done. It was the next day when they do the dive, and we've never been under the water with Indiana Jones, and this was a pretty cool scene. There was a lot of stuff going on the screen. Again, too much CGI, but it was still cool. Voller shows up, and this thing that they found under the water, there's some writing on it, and his goddaughter is willing to tell them if he spares their lives after they kill Indiana Jones's friend, Antonio Banderas. And it's at that point you find out she had stuck behind her a piece of dynamite. Indiana Jones helps her light it. They blow up that bottom part of the boat so that they can get away. So they steal the boat that the Germans came on, and the Germans are left on the boat. Now, they have a kind of a raft that they could take, that they're blowing up to go after Indiana Jones and her, but Indiana Jones and his goddaughter are able to take the part that they had with them onto the boat that the Germans, and they're going to where they think the whole second part of the Antikythera was, because you find out that this was the dial that had the time on it, and that they still need the second half to put it all together. Well, they know where it is. She was leading the Germans in a different direction. But Voller ends up getting some binoculars and finds that they're going in the wrong direction. So Indiana Jones is able to figure out from his knowledge of everything where they are going and where they need to go. And he actually ends up melting the part that they found underwater, and it does have that time device in it, made all out in gold. Now, this is where one of those weird things happens in the film that doesn't make sense. I don't know how Voller was able to get their direction and follow after them, because they had Indiana Jones and his goddaughter had a much bigger boat that was much faster. How they were able to keep up and know exactly where they were going doesn't make any sense, especially with the distance that they go when you see it on the map. So it's kind of a flaw in the film, but they do end up following them. Now, this is where kind of the third act of the movie comes in, where Indiana Jones is where they believe this device is. They believe they're going to the tomb of Archimedes. And during this scene, there's a moment where Shaw is working with this kid, and one thing I forgot to mention is there's a kid who's helping her throughout the movie, and you find out that he's there to help her peddle this stuff and is kind of like her right-hand man, kind of like Indiana Jones in Short Round. And she has a scene with this kid, and he tells her, "Why are you letting him lead you around?" She goes, "Oh, he's not in charge. I'm in charge. His name is Teddy." She goes, "Teddy, I'm in charge. Just remember that." And she never is. I do believe that that's where Disney was going at one point, but they ditched that after the early reactions on the film weren't good, so they kind of changed the movie to make it centered around Indiana Jones, where it was originally centered around her, where the only connection that she's centered around here is that she is Baz's daughter and Indiana Jones' goddaughter. That's it, but she was never in charge. So Indiana Jones figures out where it is. At this point, Voller and his team come in and end up kidnapping Teddy. And Indiana Jones says they're not going to kill him. They need him. So we need to get there before they do. So there's a moment in here where he ends up referring back to the blood of Kali and, all the stuff they did to deal with in Temple of Doom and some other things. And he does talk about his age as they're climbing up to where the opening is. And it's kind of an interesting scene, but it's still Indiana Jones. He's admitting he's older, but it's all still him. They ended up in a room that is full of methane, and they need to get out. She's trying to desperately find a way out through these doors that were there, and he's like, they didn't get out that way. And then he starts looking at this water area in the bottom, and he remembers that Archimedes was very interested in water displacement. So he's like, you need to get into the pool with me, and we need to start putting stuff into the pool. It brings up the water into this device, and that's when the ground lowers below them, and they fall into this area where we do find the tomb of Archimedes. So they open it up, and they do get the second dial. At the same time, Shaw's looking around the tomb, and she notices where he was set that there's the picture of a phoenix, the bird. She notices it has propellers on it. And Indiana Jones finds a watch on Archimedes. And he's like, they didn't invent watches for over 1,000 years. And so they both assume that this proves that the device actually does work. That's when Voller's team show up. We get to see Indiana Jones use a gun several times in the film, and this is one of those scenes. There's a shootout that was not quite as good as what we had in Raiders, but it did show Indiana Jones using a gun, which was nice because we didn't see that in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He pulled his gun once, and he never used it. And so we get to see him use guns in this film several times. And so it was pretty freaking cool. Now, what ends up happening is Teddy was with them and was able to get away. He was able to help break the bridge. He was handcuffed to the bigger guy of the group, and they get swept away in the waters. And Teddy is able to kill him by getting the handcuffs off, and he basically traps him underwater. And he's able to get the jump on the men when they're about to take the dial. And Indiana Jones tells her and Teddy to get out. He's going to stay with these guys. Now, during this gunfight, Indiana Jones gets shot in the shoulder, and the Germans take him. So now you've got Voller there, and he has a discussion with Indiana Jones, and he's like, what is your whole purpose with this dial? What do you want to do? And he reveals to Indiana Jones that what he wants to do is go back in time to 1939 before Hitler loses the war, and he's going to go back to a time frame to where Voller can go in, kill Hitler, and take over because he knows how to win the war. So he's there to kill the Fuhrer. That's why he wants to go back to 1939. So they end up on a plane together to go. The dial is telling them that there's going to be a fissure in the sky, and they're on a plane to go do this. In the meantime, Shaw and Teddy are trying to figure out how to get on the plane. Teddy, they find another plane, and she asks Teddy, are you able to fly? And he's like, yes, I can fly it. So he goes to steal it, and in the meantime, she wants to get on the plane where Indiana Jones is taking off. So Teddy goes to take the plane, and he is able to fly off. In the meantime, Shaw gets a motorcycle and actually finds her way onto the plane. And this is another area where we had heavy CGI as she's riding through the rain, and she's able to get in through the landing gear of the plane and get inside the plane thinking she's going to save Indiana Jones. What ends up happening on the plane is Indiana Jones reveals to them that there's something about the current that Archimedes would not have known. And that even though Voller thinks that they're going to go back to 1939, Indiana Jones says it could be way off by degrees, which could be hundreds to thousands of years off. And he's like, if you go through, you're not going to end up in the time period that you think you're going to. So they end up going through time. They come out on the other side, and both Teddy's plane and their plane loses their signal, and they end up, the engines turn off, and they end up falling. They're both able to get control of their planes again, and you go down, and you think all of a sudden that they're back in 1939. You see the war going on down below them. But then as the plane gets closer, you notice something weird. These aren't ships. These aren't Navy ships or, warships. These are like pirate ships. And you find out that they actually went back to 200 BC, to the time of Archimedes and that famous war, the one that Indiana Jones was talking about at the beginning with his class. And what ends up happening is Shaw shows up, the chaos breaks out. The people down below are shooting things at their plane and are able to kill a lot of the Germans. So all that's left is like the pilot, and you've got Voller there. And what ends up happening is Shaw shows up, and Indiana Jones is like, "What are you doing here?" She's like, "I'm here. I'm here to rescue you." Well, she's not there to rescue anybody because she ends up getting in trouble. Indiana Jones is able to get a parachute on, and he saves her. And they end up having to jump off the plane. And as they jump off the plane is going to crash, and you see that Voller is going to die along with his men. So that's the end of Voller. Now, they parachute down below, and Archimedes sees what's going on, and he goes to investigate. And actually saves Shaw and also saves Indiana Jones from being killed by the opposing army. When he's down there, he has a conversation with Shaw, and he's like, "This is amazing. I've dreamed about this my entire life." And he's like, "I'm going to stay. You need to go." Teddy lands the plane, and you find out that there was a guy. The guys who he stole the plane from was sleeping in the plane. And so they're going to be able to get back through that plane. But she's like, "You can't stay here. You're going to die. They don't have the medicine that you need to survive. I need you to take you back to 1969 or whatever it was, because you don't belong here." He's like, "I need to stay here. It's something I need to do." And he really sold the scene. Like, a lot of people said this isn't Indiana Jones's character, and this is what I believed when I heard about these rumors prior to going to see it. I said Indiana Jones would never do that. But actually seeing the scene and knowing who Indiana Jones is and that he studied history, you do realize that, yes, he would have wanted to stay there. I think anybody who'd ever thought about history, and this was their entire life, would want to stay in that time frame to study it and be a part of it. But she's like, "You can't. You'll muck up time. You need to go back with us." And he won't go with her. Archimedes shows up, and Shaw realizes that dial was never going to take them anywhere else but there, that Archimedes had set that device to bring people there so that he would know that his device works. As Archimedes is coming up, they pass the plane where Voller crashed, and he takes the watch off of Voller, and he puts it on, and that's when he also notices the device. He gives the device back to Shaw and Indiana Jones, and they have a conversation about Jones staying and not staying, and that's when Shaw ends up punching Indiana Jones and knocking him out. The next scene, he's back in his apartment in the 60s, and he's, there's all this medicine off to the side, and that's when he wakes up, and Shaw's there, and she's like, "Oh, you're awake." And she's like, how does your shoulder feel? He goes, "Better than my jaw." And he's like, "You should have left me." She goes, "I couldn't do that." That's when he goes out into the living room and talks to her and says, "There was nothing for me here. I wanted to stay." And she goes, "You don't understand the implications of time. You could have changed everything." And he's like, "Would that be a bad thing?" Which was kind of a weird comment. And that's when all of a sudden the door opens up and Marion is there. And she goes to the kitchen with Indiana Jones, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" She goes, "Well, I heard that Indiana Jones was back." And he's like, "No, what are you doing here?" She looks at his face and says, "Indy, are you back?" And they have a nice moment there, and that's when Sala and Teddy and Sala's kids show up, and they take Shaw, and they go off to have ice cream, and Sala does that song like he did during Raiders of the Lost Ark. And they end up leaving. And it was nice to see Sala again. It was very nice to see him again. And that's when Marion and him have a moment, and they recreate part of the scene of what we saw in Raiders. And the very last scene of the film, the very last scene, is outside Indiana Jones's bedroom window. His hat is hanging on a clip outside on a line. And the camera goes to focus in on it, and all of a sudden the hat gets grabbed from the inside and brought into the apartment. What does this mean? It means Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones. They did not pass the torch on to Helena in the film, to Wombat, to his goddaughter. This was very much an Indiana Jones movie, and he is always going to be Indiana Jones. Here's the thing about this film. If Disney thinks that they are going to use Helena in the future, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, her character, to carry the franchise on, they are horribly mistaken. She was a very annoying character in the film. She was not likable, and no amount of editing was going to make her likable. And so she is by no means going to carry the franchise. At the end of the day, I do give this film 4.5 out of 5 stars. I liked it a lot more than I did Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And The Dial of Destiny was a true Indiana Jones adventure through and through. He was 80 years old, and so we're not going to see him dragged behind trucks, getting into massive fistfights, but he held his own in the film, and he was very much Indiana Jones. There were certain scenes where his facial features and his demeanor was very much like he was in Raiders, and I very much appreciated that take on it. My biggest complaint with the film is it was heavy CGI, and the colors in the film were very muted compared to the other films. If you saw all of the advertisements for the film, there were always these yellows, reds, and oranges that are associated with Indiana Jones and the look of the desert and everything else. And in this film, they specifically muted all the colors. And I don't know why they decided to do that. I don't know if they were trying to make it seem like it was the 60s for a different time period, but it gave it this artificial feel that the other films didn't have. Now, we had some of it in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and it does have to revolve around the heavy CGI. But at the end of the day, it doesn't take away from the adventure. It is very much an Indiana Jones adventure through and through, and it was really great to see Harrison Ford back as Indiana Jones one last time. It actually teared me up at the theater the first time I saw it, and it's sad that that was the first and last time I will see an Indiana Jones movie with Harrison Ford in the theaters. Now, I do hope they carry the franchise on. The only person I personally see that could carry this franchise on in the future as a young Indiana Jones is Chris Pratt. Now, a lot of people don't like that, but I called this out before anybody else did. When I saw the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, I was like, holy crap, he has the whole entire demeanor and feel of Harrison Ford as that character Indiana Jones. And I would like to see them continue on with this. Now, I don't think Disney is going to continue on with Indiana Jones. I have a feeling that after this movie gets released digitally, that they're going to bury this franchise because it's not making any money. And it's not making money because everybody's afraid to go see it because Disney has ruined so many franchises that they've gotten their hands on. And people are afraid to spend the money on these franchises, seeing their beloved characters get destroyed by Disney. Now, that didn't happen in this film, and I'm very grateful that didn't happen, but it's still not getting people to go see it. And that's sad, because I want more novels, I want more comic books. Now, if you stick to my channel in the future, I told you Indiana Jones is my all-time favorite character, and I'm going to eventually be reviewing every novel, all the comics going back from Marvel all the way up through Dark Horse. I'm actually going to be covering all of that stuff in the future. I'm going to have an Indiana Jones specific playlist on my channel so that you guys will be able to go there and check it every once in a while for the Indiana Jones stuff that you may miss. I also have the 3 Lego sets that I need to review, and I'm hoping they announce some more Indiana Jones Lego sets soon. But one thing is very clear, that they are burying a lot of the Temple of Doom stuff. There was supposed to be a Lego set that was going to come out, and I think they've completely canceled it. And we were supposed to get a Mola Ram Adventure Series figure, and they canceled that as well. And so they're running away from Temple of Doom, even though it was mentioned several times during Dial of Destiny. But at the end of the day, I love this movie. I'm looking forward to going and seeing it more times. I'm looking forward to owning it, the whole set of all 5 films. And it's a franchise that I absolutely adore. So if you haven't seen it, go see it yourself. Make up your own mind. But there's my full spoiler review for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. There were definitely things that I missed, but I do encourage people, if you haven't seen it, go see it, enjoy it. It's the last time you're going to see Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. All right, I do appreciate the support. We will see you on the next video.